My fiancée left her phone in the car. A voicemail played automatically. Last night was insane. Same time tomorrow. She snatched the phone and said, "It's not what you think." When I checked the caller's name, the day started ordinary enough that I still replay it in my head, trying to find the moment where things quietly split in two. Corinne and I had gone to the grocery store after work, one of those routine stops that barely registered as time spent together. We talked about food, about a neighbor repainting their fence, about nothing that mattered. If someone had filmed us, it would have looked like stability. That was the lie I was living inside. When we pulled into the driveway, she stayed in the car for a second longer than usual, scrolling on her phone. I didn't think anything of it. She was always answering messages, juggling work conversations, group chats, family updates. I grabbed the grocery bags from the trunk and started toward the house. Halfway to the door, I realized she hadn't followed. I turned back just as her car speakers came to life. The voicemail played automatically, loud enough that there was no pretending it hadn't happened. The voice was male, relaxed, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten instantly. He sounded amused, comfortable, like someone who knew exactly where he stood. Last night was insane. Same time tomorrow? The message ended. Silence filled the driveway in a way that felt heavier than noise. I stood there holding 2 bags of groceries, milk digging into my palm, while my brain tried to catch up with what my ears had already processed. Corinne lunged for the phone. She fumbled with it, nearly dropping it as she shut the door and killed the audio. Her movements were too fast, too sharp, like someone swatting at something dangerous. She looked at me and immediately started talking, words tumbling over each other in a rush that didn't match the calm voice from the voicemail. She said it wasn't what it sounded like. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said it was a work thing that got out of hand, a stupid joke, something she should have shut down earlier. She said all of this without stopping to breathe, as if speed alone could keep the moment from solidifying. I didn't respond right away, not because I was frozen, but because I had learned over years of dealing with pressure at work that silence makes people reveal more than shouting ever does. I watched her instead. Her hands were shaking, and she didn't seem aware of it. Her eyes kept darting back to the car, to the phone, like it might start talking again on its own. I asked whose voice it was. She hesitated for half a second too long. That pause mattered more than anything she said afterward. She gave me a name I had never heard before and followed it with an explanation about a client who crossed a line, someone who didn't understand boundaries, someone she had already planned to block. The explanation was neat. Too neat. It wrapped itself up without loose ends, which told me it had been practiced or at least imagined before. I asked to see the phone. She resisted immediately, then corrected herself, handing it over with exaggerated confidence. That overcorrection didn't help her. I didn't open messages. I didn't scroll. I checked the voicemail screen and looked at the saved contact name. The name was Stefan. It wasn't saved as a first name. It wasn't saved as a client. It was saved under a company name that didn't ring any bells, followed by an extension number that didn't exist. Someone doesn't disguise a contact like that by accident. I looked up at her again. She noticed where my eyes had been and started talking faster. She said she saved it that way because she didn't want coworkers seeing personal contacts on her phone. She said she was being careful. She said she didn't think it mattered. I asked her why a client would leave a voicemail talking about last night being insane and planning tomorrow. Her story shifted. The client became an old acquaintance. The joke explanation became poorly worded enthusiasm about a project. The boundary crossing became mutual joking that went too far, but stopped short of anything serious. Each version contradicted the one before it in small ways she didn't seem to notice. I didn't accuse her of cheating. Not yet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten to leave. I asked questions that forced timelines to exist. I asked when the voicemail was recorded. She said the night before. I asked where she had been the night before. She said her sister's place, the same place she had mentioned casually when she got home late and tired, complaining about traffic and an argument over dinner plans. The memory snapped into focus with uncomfortable clarity. I remembered offering to pick her up. I remembered her declining, saying she needed space to cool off. The voicemail timestamp matched that night perfectly. That was the moment something inside me stopped trying to make the situation survivable. It wasn't panic or rage. It was calculation. Lies only work when they exist alone. Once they overlap, they collapse. I told her to bring the groceries inside. Not because I cared about dinner, but because I wanted her out of the car and away from the phone. She obeyed without thinking, still talking, still trying to fill silence with reassurance. Inside the house, she set bags down randomly, items mixed together without logic, like her focus had shattered. I watched her pace the kitchen while I pretended to put things away. She repeated that nothing happened, then said something might have happened, but it didn't mean anything, then said it was already over. She hadn't realized she was covering 3 different outcomes at once. I asked her directly if she had slept with Stefan. She said no too quickly. Then she said it was complicated. Then she said she didn't know why this was happening like this. That last sentence wasn't an answer at all. I didn't push further. Not yet. I told her I needed time to process and went upstairs. That decision surprised her more than anger would have. She followed me halfway up the stairs before stopping, watching as if unsure whether to continue or retreat. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed and replayed the voicemail in my head. The tone mattered more than the words. There was no secrecy in it. No caution. It wasn't the voice of someone sneaking around. It was the voice of someone operating inside routine. Downstairs, I heard her moving around, opening cabinets, closing drawers, trying to look busy. The normal sounds of our shared life suddenly felt staged. That night, she slept beside me without touching me, pretending exhaustion. I lay awake listening to her breathing change when she thought I was asleep. I noticed how often she checked her phone under the blanket, the screen lighting her face faintly in the dark. I noticed how she angled it away from me, how she muted it when a notification came through. By morning, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was observing. When I left for work, I didn't mention the voicemail again. That confused her. She kissed me goodbye with a nervous intensity that didn't match the situation she claimed existed. I told her we would talk later. I meant it, but not in the way she expected. During the day, I replayed conversations from the past few months with new context. Nights, she came home energized instead of tired. Sudden changes in routine. A new interest in fitness that required long evening sessions. Small irritations with me that felt disproportionate at the time. None of it proved anything on its own. Together, it formed a shape I didn't like. By the time I drove home that evening, I wasn't angry. I was alert. Whatever Corinne had built was already cracking under its own weight. The voicemail wasn't the betrayal. It was the error that revealed one. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. I sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the quiet. Inside that house was a person who believed she could still control the story. She didn't yet understand that once a lie speaks out loud, it never fully shuts up again. That was only the beginning. The day after the voicemail, Corinne acted like someone who believed the danger had passed. That was the mistake. People who think they have survived a moment tend to relax, and relaxation creates gaps. She made coffee, asked about my day, complained about a deadline at work. She behaved like continuity itself was proof that nothing serious had happened. I let it continue. I had learned something important the night before. Corinne did not improvise well under pressure, but she was excellent when she believed she was in control. If I pushed too early, she would retreat into rehearsed explanations. If I waited, she would reveal patterns she no longer thought to hide. I started small. I paid attention to timing. She left the house earlier than usual that week, always with an excuse that sounded reasonable on its own. Traffic. Meetings moved up. A coworker needing help. She came home later too, often carrying the restless energy of someone who had already lived part of their evening elsewhere. Our shared calendar was the first thing I checked. We had synced it years ago to manage schedules, trips, and family events. At first glance, nothing stood out. Then I noticed edits. Blocks of time that used to have notes now sat blank. A dinner that had been labeled suddenly appeared as free time. The changes were subtle, but they followed a rhythm. I compared them to my own memory. Nights she had said she was with her sister. Nights she had said she stayed late at the office. The gaps matched the voicemail night perfectly. I didn't touch her phone again. That would have alerted her. Instead, I used what was already shared between us. Location history was still enabled on our devices, something we had set up years earlier for convenience and forgotten about. I told myself I would check it once. That was a lie. The first night I checked, my stomach tightened before I even understood why. Her location stopped near the same cluster of buildings every time. An apartment complex 10 minutes from our house, far enough to feel intentional. She never stayed long enough to suggest errands. She stayed long enough to suggest routine. I zoomed in and recognized the place. I had driven past it dozens of times without noticing. Beige buildings, identical balconies, a parking lot that always seemed half full. Nothing about it stood out except how consistently it appeared in her history. The next evening, I asked her casually how her sister was doing. She didn't hesitate. She launched into a story about an argument over something trivial, complete with details meant to sound lived in. She added emotion to it, frustration layered with affection, like she had rehearsed not just facts but tone. Her phone buzzed mid-sentence. She flipped it face down immediately. I asked who that was. She said work. I asked if everything was okay. She said yes and kept talking, but her story lost its shape. She repeated herself without noticing. The confidence she had started with slipped, replaced by impatience. That night, after she fell asleep, I didn't need to sneak around. Her phone lit up beside the bed. The name didn't appear, just the preview of a voicemail notification. I didn't touch it. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. The next morning, I confronted her earlier than planned. Not with accusations, but with precision. I told her the voicemail bothered me more the longer I thought about it. I said the timing didn't add up. I said her explanations kept changing. I said I needed honesty before this became something irreversible. She cried immediately. Real tears this time, not panic. She said she had met Stefan months ago through mutual acquaintances. She said he had reached out during a rough period when she felt disconnected and unsure. She said it started as talking and crossed lines emotionally, but never physically. She said it ended weeks ago, and the voicemail was an attempt to reopen something she had already shut down. The story sounded believable until it didn't. Emotional affairs don't produce voicemail tones like the one I heard. People don't talk about repeating last night unless last night existed. I asked why she saved his contact under a fake name. She said she was embarrassed. I asked why she lied about where she was. She said she didn't want to hurt me. I asked why she kept going to the same place. She froze. That question hadn't been part of her script. She accused me of tracking her. She said that was invasive. She said trust goes both ways. The shift was aggressive and sudden, an attempt to move the conversation away from her behavior. It didn't work. I told her I wasn't tracking her. I told her patterns show themselves when people repeat choices. I told her the truth mattered more than tone. That was when the second voicemail came in. Her phone was on the table between us. It buzzed once, softly, and she looked at it without thinking. Her face changed in a way she couldn't control. It wasn't fear. It was annoyance. That reaction told me everything. She didn't answer it. She didn't even check it. She pushed the phone aside and kept talking, doubling down on the emotional-only explanation. I let her finish. Then I asked to listen to the voicemail together. She said no. I asked again calmly. She said it would only confuse things. Later that night, when she went to shower, I listened to it alone. I didn't need her permission. The voicemail wasn't explicit, but it was intimate in the way routines are intimate. He referenced something they did regularly. He mentioned timing, traffic, an inside complaint about her being late. This was not a man trying to start something. This was a man continuing something. I sat on the edge of the bed while the shower ran upstairs and felt the final piece click into place. Corinne wasn't cheating impulsively. She wasn't spiraling. She was managing. She had built a second life that ran parallel to ours, not chaotic but organized. There were rules, schedules, excuses prepared in advance. The voicemail wasn't a slip of desire. It was a scheduling error. When she came back into the room, wrapped in a towel, I didn't confront her. I told her we needed space. I told her I wasn't ready to talk. She agreed too quickly, relief washing over her face. That relief was confirmation. Over the next few days, I observed quietly. I noticed how she protected certain nights, how she grew irritated when plans shifted. I noticed how she guarded her phone without the nervousness of someone hiding a secret, but with the confidence of someone used to doing it. I also did something she never expected. I looked up Stefan. Not obsessively, not emotionally, just enough to know who I was dealing with. He wasn't a stranger from nowhere. He was part of her past, someone she had mentioned years ago dismissively, framed as a problem she had escaped. That framing had been a warning, not reassurance. By the end of the week, I wasn't wondering if she was cheating. I was wondering how long she thought she could run two realities without them colliding. The voicemail had been the first collision. The next one wouldn't be accidental. By the time I decided to involve Stefan directly, the story had already stopped being about betrayal and started being about structure. Corinne wasn't improvising. She had built something that required maintenance, alignment, and silence from everyone involved. The voicemail hadn't exposed emotion. It had exposed logistics. I didn't reach out in anger. I waited until I understood the shape of what she was doing. I wanted facts to meet facts, not reactions colliding blindly. The opportunity came when she told me she would be staying late at work for a department review. She mentioned it casually, as if late nights were now background noise. I watched her leave, waited 10 minutes, and then checked the location history again. The same apartment complex appeared, steady and predictable. I didn't follow her. That would have turned me into part of the chaos. Instead, I sent Stefan a message using the number saved under the fake company name. I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't threaten. I wrote something neutral enough to pass as professional confusion, asking to confirm an earlier conversation. He replied faster than I expected. The tone was informal. Familiar. He didn't question why I was contacting him. That told me Corinne had already framed me in some way, likely as a fading presence rather than an obstacle. I asked directly who he thought I was. He paused before answering. That pause mattered. He said he thought I was already out of the picture. He said Corinne told him the engagement was effectively over, just waiting for logistics to catch up. He said he believed he was stepping into something that had already ended. I asked him how long this had been going on. He gave me a time frame that reached back further than I expected, overlapping moments I had thought were solid. Holidays. Family visits. Even the night I proposed. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to slow the conversation down, to keep it from turning emotional. I asked him where he was now. He told me the apartment complex address, without hesitation. That confirmation removed the last layer of doubt. Corinne wasn't torn. She wasn't choosing. She was managing two parallel tracks until one became more convenient. I told Stefan the truth, carefully. I told him we were still living together. I told him the wedding planning was active. I told him about the voicemail and the lies. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften anything either. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He asked for proof. I sent him a single photograph of our engagement announcement pinned to the refrigerator, timestamped from that morning. The response took longer this time. When it came, it wasn't anger. It was confusion. He told me she had described me as emotionally distant, focused on work, already disengaged. He said she told him the wedding was more of a formality than a future. Two different men, two different stories, both carefully designed to keep us compliant. We compared timelines. That was when the system unraveled. Her excuses conflicted in ways that could no longer be ignored. Nights she claimed to be with one of us had been with the other. Travel stories overlapped impossibly. Details didn't match because they were never meant to be compared. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt precise. That night, Corinne came home later than usual. She seemed lighter, relaxed, like someone who believed a problem had been contained. She started talking about dinner plans and a show we had been watching, trying to re-establish rhythm. I interrupted her calmly and told her I had spoken to Stefan. The effect was immediate. Her face drained of color, then flushed, then settled into something guarded and hard. She didn't deny it. She accused me of betrayal instead, of going behind her back, of making things worse. I told her things were already worse. I told her I now knew she had been lying to both of us. I told her Stefan thought the engagement was over months ago. She laughed once, sharply, then stopped herself. She said he misunderstood. She said she never meant to mislead anyone. She said emotions had gotten tangled. I told her emotions don't schedule nights and maintain cover stories. She tried to pivot. She said I was controlling. She said I didn't give her space. She said pressure made her act out. The explanations stacked up without cohesion, each one designed to redirect responsibility. I didn't argue. I told her I was done discussing motivations. I told her we would separate our lives immediately. That meant finances, housing, and social commitments. That was when she panicked. She asked me not to tell anyone yet. She said timing mattered. She said we could handle this privately. She said exposure would damage her career. That concern revealed more than any confession. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing narrative control. I told her I wasn't interested in managing appearances for her anymore. The next day, things escalated without my involvement. Stefan confronted her independently, armed with the same timeline comparisons. She tried to rewrite the story again, but repetition had worn down her credibility. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply exited. That exit caused a ripple she hadn't anticipated. She missed a family obligation that evening, one she had promised to attend. When her mother called me to ask where she was, I told the truth without embellishment. I said Corinne and I were separating due to dishonesty. I didn't provide details. I didn't need to. Within hours, questions began circulating. Not accusations, just confusion. Stories were compared casually. Small inconsistencies became visible to people who had known her for years. She tried to reach me repeatedly. I didn't block her. I let the calls go unanswered. Silence was more effective now than explanation. By the end of the week, her workplace became aware something was wrong. She had used work as cover too often, borrowing credibility she couldn't repay. Schedules didn't align. Excuses conflicted. Supervisors noticed. I moved my remaining belongings out while she was at work. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter. Not as a statement, but as closure. The collision wasn't explosive. It was structural failure. Everything she had balanced collapsed because balance requires honesty to remain stable. Once lies multiply, they weigh more than the system can carry. By the time she realized that, there was nothing left to adjust. Only consequences waiting to land. By the time the last phase began, there was nothing dramatic left to uncover. No secrets remained hidden. No confrontations waited in ambush. What followed was quieter and more destructive because it involved consequences rather than emotion. Corinne didn't understand that at first. She kept trying to talk as if conversation itself could reverse damage. She left long messages that circled the same points, apologizing without specifics, blaming circumstances, asking for time. She framed everything as temporary, something we could pause and resume later. That belief revealed how she viewed relationships in general, not as commitments, but as adjustable systems. I didn't respond. Silence wasn't punishment. It was separation. The moment I stopped engaging, her influence over my future ended. I contacted a lawyer to formalize the division of shared assets. We had kept finances mostly separate, but there were enough shared expenses to require clarity. The paperwork was clean. There were no arguments because there was nothing to argue over. When she realized I wasn't bluffing, she escalated socially. She contacted mutual friends, offering vague explanations designed to preserve sympathy without inviting scrutiny. That worked briefly, until people compared notes. Stories she had told one person didn't align with what she told another. Small contradictions accumulated quickly once she lost the ability to control timing. Her family asked to meet. I agreed to speak with them once, privately, without her present. I didn't dramatize anything. I explained the voicemail, the lies, the parallel relationship, and the timeline. I answered questions calmly and directly. The reaction wasn't explosive. It was subdued disappointment, which lasted longer. They didn't take sides publicly. They simply withdrew. Invitations stopped. Support became conditional. The silence she had relied on from others disappeared. Work became the next fracture point. Corinne had used professional obligations as cover too often, borrowing legitimacy she couldn't replace. When she requested time off abruptly to manage the separation, the inconsistencies in her schedule surfaced. Meetings she claimed to attend had no record. Travel explanations conflicted with internal logs. She wasn't fired. She was sidelined, quietly, the way organizations do when trust erodes, but proof isn't dramatic enough for spectacle. Stefan exited completely. Not angrily, not theatrically. He stopped responding, blocked her, and moved on. That loss unsettled her more than losing me. He represented an option, a future she had mentally prepared. When that option vanished, she was left with only the present consequences. She showed up at the house one evening unannounced. I was there collecting mail and checking the empty rooms before handing the keys over to the realtor. She stood in the doorway and looked around as if expecting things to feel familiar again. They didn't. She asked if we could talk one last time. I said no. I said everything that needed to be said had already been said, just not out loud. She tried to argue that people make mistakes. I said mistakes are isolated events, not sustained systems. That was the last conversation we had. After that, her life contracted. Not dramatically, but measurably. Social circles thinned. Opportunities paused. Stability disappeared. She wasn't ruined. She was exposed. That exposure changed how people interacted with her, how much trust they extended, how much benefit of the doubt remained. My life moved forward faster than I expected. Without managing someone else's deception, time expanded. I slept better. I stopped checking patterns because there was nothing left to monitor. I didn't feel relief immediately. Relief came later, quietly, when I realized I wasn't bracing for surprises anymore. Months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Corinne still described the breakup as complicated. That word allowed her to avoid accountability while acknowledging loss. Complicated meant no one could ask direct questions without seeming insensitive. It was consistent with how she had always managed narratives. The difference was that I no longer participated. The voicemail that started everything became irrelevant over time. It wasn't the moment that destroyed us. It was the moment that revealed there was nothing left to protect. What ended the relationship wasn't betrayal alone. It was the realization that honesty had never been part of the structure. I didn't win anything from this. I didn't get revenge. I didn't get satisfaction. What I got was clarity, which lasted longer. When I think back to that driveway, groceries in my hands, voicemail echoing between us, I don't replay it with anger. I replay it as the moment noise cut through performance. A single message, accidentally played, said more truth than years of conversation ever had. Everything that followed wasn't chaos. It was consequence.
Qley with her makeup. Qley absolutely, sort of created this cultural moment, if you will, and disrupted an entire beauty industry, showing people that you could buy something without having a lot of marketing around it and launching makeup online. I mean, that was incredible. And then that's when it really exploded for everyone else. She was the first one to really, do that in such a big way. When she came to me and said, I know exactly what I want to do. I know exactly what I want it to look like. I know exactly what the product should be. And she was 17.
Wow.
And I said, oh, wow. Okay. And then, a couple weeks before she launched, I was like, well, where's the marketing materials? Where are we, are we doing billboards?